Aloha and welcome to Our Undoing Radio. I am Jeremy Vaeni, and I'm here to set you straight. I don't know. I don't know about that. But I said in the last episode that I would be drawing heavily this season from a Tom Cheatham class or seminar series that I was privileged to not just sit in on, but be a part of, to speak at. And part of what we wanted to do was take questions from the audience, some of which we got to, but some of which we didn't. And so I thought I would read one of them here and respond to it on this show, because I feel bad that somebody bothered to write to me and I didn't get to respond. So the question, it's about my book Urgency, and it begins: I understand that the drama of a wild animal becoming conscious and self-aware is to be taken as a creation myth, an imagined story that reveals the truths that can be given by that story. Assuming we can agree on that, well, let me stop you there. So he's talking about, I believe, in Urgency, I talk about the animal wakes up, and then into this self-awareness that we, the human animal essentially wakes up, and whatever the others were, I don't know, Neanderthal, hobbits, whatever they were. But let's just stick with the humans, because that's what we are. We wake up into this separate-ish self-sense. When I say separate self-sense, I don't mean like the westernized mind version of that, but just, we've got this awareness that appears to be different, transcending and including, or transcendent and inclusive of the consciousnesses around us. And so I'm saying at the moment that happened, there is this reflexive fear. This is what I talked about in Urgency at any rate. And then that reflexive fear, which is like of the unknown or the unknowable, of life and death, of just being here all of a sudden and realizing it, like you're out. Crap, I'm out of the stream. Wait. That there's fear. Is that a creation myth, or is that actually what happened? He's saying that's a creation myth, what I wrote, and assuming we can agree on that, well, I don't agree. I think that from within time, that is what happened. I think, from out of time, of course, everything's always already happening right now, so there is no beginning, there is no end, and that's just a detail on the canvas of existence. But anyway, let's go on here. Assuming we can agree on that, my question is, why is the story that the emotional reaction to self-awareness is one of terror and fear? So much of the brain patterns that are then presented derive from that part of the story. Why are fear and terror the primary reactions given? So he's asking, he's using the passive voice to ask me, why am I saying that? Why am I saying that there is fear and terror are the primary reactions? Because, put yourself in the shoes of the first person to have woken up, or the first people to have woken up. You were a baby once. Did you cry? What was that about? Was that because you were in love of being alive? Or is there immediate, just this visceral reaction that then doctors and parents, hopefully the mom, but worst case scenario, doctors, some authority figure, tells you everything's okay and gives you sustenance. Perhaps she puts your lip to her breast, because you're probably starving. Right? So you don't know what's going on. You're flailing and screaming as a baby, and you need to be nurtured. That's why we have nurture. You're not born into some Buddha consciousness. That comes later through creative visualization and practice, or whatever it is the Buddhists do. And so it is like, to be awake and to be out of, to be alone in that way, and to see measurement, to see separation, to see death, lifespan and death, and not know what any of this stuff is about, but to just be in that headspace is to immediately want to cover it up with a story. And then that story nurtures you. And this is what religions do. This is what cultures do. It's all, not all, but a lot of it is a cover up for the fear of death, which is the fear of life. Essentially, the fear of not knowing a damn thing. I mean, we cover over that every day. Why don't we just every day wake up with this, with a oneness-y, lovey-dovey self-awareness? I mean, even me breathing right now, I'm breathing in oxygen, presumably, and other things, microplastics. But I'm breathing, and my lungs take in the air, and if I think about it, I can do it myself consciously, but most of the day I'm just going about not consciously breathing, and the breathing is just happening. And I just leave it at that. If I'm a scientist or a materialist, I may look into how does this all work? The oxygen, and then you come up with, well, you see oxygen enters the lungs, and then it converts into energy, or whatever it is, whatever the science tells you. But that still doesn't tell you why that's working. It just tells you how that's working. It still actually doesn't make sense. Like, the more sense we make out of things, the more we try to reduce everything to, like, rational processes, the more we forget that at the base of that is this sort of superfluous nature, where it could have been anything, it just happens to be these things. And, of course, we see that with other life forms that don't breathe oxygen, for instance. But why do they breathe what they breathe? Why does it work? Why does breathing? Why life at all? Right? We contemplate these questions, or we don't. I mean, that's a fairly innocuous and benign and childlike question. Why anything other than nothing? And yet we cover it over with these answers. The religious people cover it over with, well, it's God's will. And the scientist covers it over with, well, you see, and then they fix their spectacles and tell you this great explanation of how it works and ignore the fact of why it works. And it just does. And the more they look, the more they're going to uncover more and more rabbit holes of processes that talk about the how. And then again, it gets them to forget about that the why is superfluous. The why, that there is no why. So in other words, at the heart of everything is this this real lack of meaning that we have, this real lack of anything, for all the substance that we are, anything substantial in us. And so we make stuff up. We make up stories, and we substitute those stories for the real. But if we ever stopped doing that and just got real with ourselves about how meaningless we are, perhaps, just perhaps, in the unraveling of that, the meaning, if there is meaning that is not just a subjective experience, or an intelligence that transcends and includes matter, and isn't just arising from matter, perhaps that becomes the case. The self-awareness of that becomes the case in us when our self-awareness is done telling stories to block it out. Stories about it, presumably about it, or stories that are like substitutes for that. Does that make sense? So in other words, that is what we're doing. Like, you're asking, why is it that I'm claiming that we wake up into terror and fear and everything is just sort of a reflexive reaction to block that out? It's because that's what we do. Because we are separate self-senses, which doesn't mean that we're necessarily divorced from nature and all that. There are nature cultures that have sort of a parallel mind, I would argue, to the westernized mind. But even that, it's still all within the scope of understanding and living from the point of view of separateness, one which is interconnecting with all, and the other which is trying to be divorced and autonomous and individual and my rights and my property and my. But neither of which is the first person identity as timeless awareness, truth, what have you, whatever word you would like to use, however cold or personal, that transcends and includes all of this. It's all blocking the first person identity of that out. And why would it do, and it sounds like that sounds like a mistake when you put it that way, right? It sounds like, oh, terror and fear, that's a wrong thing to do. It's just an inevitable thing to do as the baby wakes up crying. It's an inevitable thing. If it's not, you spank it on the ass. It's just an inevitability. It's like reflexive reaction, because now you're out of the state of direct action. You're out of the state of, it's not necessarily truth in the way that I'm talking about it, but that sort of, the instinctual deep interconnectivity and awareness and nowness that animals have. We have that when we go into fear mode, actually. We have those heightened awarenesses. So maybe that's another way of seeing it, is like fear and that terror puts you in that predator-prey mode. The hunter or the hunted is the stepping stone down from nowness, from true self-identity as... What am I trying to say here? It's like if animals, and if we, as animals, live in a state, can be in a state of, for us, what would be like heightened sensation and heightened senses and heightened alertness and reflexive action that seems to be just instinctual and it's not yourself doing it. Like that's still a step down from being the self-aware being who is also being that, if that makes sense. Anyway, I'm going to go on here. So, since we don't know the truth of what happened, he continues, when self-awareness evolved out of instinct, what might other emotions be likely? Such as wonder and awe, like what Mole and Rat experienced when dawn breaks, as they are messing around in a boat on the river in The Wind in the Willows, that other famous scripture. But again, that is Mole and Rat. Now, I haven't read. Well, I probably had it read to me when I was a kid. I don't know, maybe I read it in school. But I haven't seen the cartoon in a long time. But I'm just going to assume here that Mole and Rat, when they experience dawn breaking, and they're messing around in a boat on the river, they're experiencing wonder and awe because they are still they're themselves having an experience. The experience of waking up into another self-identity is not the same as being yourself and having an experience that is awe-striking. There's I don't know if it comes from religious tropes or if it's just its own New Age trope, but nevertheless, the New Age trope that we existed before we were born, and that being born, we have amnesia. Well, I guess that's reincarnation too, right? So I guess that is a religious trope. That you're born into this amnesia, and that waking up, spiritually waking up, is remembering yourself. And, that's works metaphorically for what we're talking about here, as opposed to, again, you having an experience of awe, you seeing some glorious mountain that is beautiful and awe-striking and shuts you down for a moment, where you are at one with the mountain. Even you are experiencing that beauty so deeply that it almost it penetrates you for a moment, and you kind of are that beauty. Most people who have that experience then go about their day. But if you think about it for too long, you may come to the realization that if you got rid of that mountain, if you destroyed it, there would be another mountain that you would have that reaction to, or an ocean, or any number of things that could promote that reaction, because beauty isn't inherent to the mountain. Beauty is a quality that transcends and includes the form of the mountain. transcends and includes form. And the fact that seeing that, noticing that penetrated you, but for a moment, the fact of that is a wake-up call that you are that. You are that beauty that transcends and includes the form. Not as some flowery notion, but like that is actually the case, that this self-sense that we've built up is blocking out our true fullness, our self beyond form, if you want to call it that, or self-sense beyond form. I mean, I don't want to say that and conjure to a higher self, but just simply that there is one self, and a good portion of it is being, the vast majority of it is being blocked out by this selfish portion of the program. I mean, in the same way that, like, there is no real unconscious self and conscious self. These are one self we're talking about. It's just that they're divided by, well, again, fear. All the things that you've done in your life to stuff down the taboo feelings you've had, or the guilt or the shame that you've felt, or whatever, any of that stuff. We're doing it to ourselves. We're cleaving ourselves off from our full expression. That is what the self does to remain in a false sense of autonomy in this world. And I guess what I'm submitting to you is that when the animal wakes up and there is no instinct to go by, because it's just woken out of instinct, and there's no nurturing mom and dad who could understand them because those people are apes, that brand new shiny self-sense immediately, reflexively patterns itself on physical processes, on its own body mechanics initially, and then what it sees around it, and all of that. And all of it is like it's a reflexive knee-jerk reaction to being awake, to being aware that you're alive and that there's a difference. The amnesia isn't to like, oh, I was awake before this, because before this you weren't wholly awakened. You weren't the self-identity of truth, let's say. You were gloriously not fighting the stream, but you weren't alive as the stream. And now you're like a stone in the stream going, I'm not moving. I don't want to budge. I'm awake. I'm alive. Look, I've got autonomy. And it's like, no, dude, you're still in the stream. And in fact, what you are is one understanding away from being the consciousness of the stream, the self-awareness of the stream. Right? That's what we're talking about. But until then, I mean, that is not fear. You are fear. You are the clenched rock in the stream, right? That is your function. And it's not, oh, shucks, why can't it be love? Why can't it be awe? Why can't it be beauty? Well, those moments of true love and awe and beauty serve as reminders that you are, in fact, those things. You're blocking them out. And I hope you see like how mechanical this is. I mean, the fear and the terror and all that, they sound awful. They feel awful, of course. If we've ever felt fear or terror in our lives, we know. But they're a quote-unquote necessary evil. They're just the thing that happens. All right. So he goes on. Since we don't have empirical evidence as to what went on in the mind and heart of animal to human, a creation origin story necessarily has to argue backward from something after the epiphany on up to the present. So much is dependent on the birth of brain patterns, as I understand it. The compelling reasons for what is thought to be their origin seems crucial. Mole and rat thought they experienced and saw holiness. And then the man signs off, and I won't say his name just in case he doesn't want it said in this forum. Let's try it this way. Here's an analogy for you. I live on a live volcano. I live on Mauna Loa in Hawaii. And it can be overwhelming living on a live volcano, especially as it did a couple of years ago when it goes off. Now, Hawaiians deal with being overwhelmed through the acceptance and the inviting it in. In the Hawaiian traditional way, when Madame Pele, who is the Hawaiian volcano goddess, goes off, and you clean your house, you open your doors and your windows, and you invite her in. You may not want to be home at that moment, but you invite her in. And so there's this acceptance, and there's this understanding of the temporariness, the fleeting nature of life and of possessions. And you are free of those burdens. That, I guess that's one benefit, is you are now free of the clenched fist that is this illusion of ownership and that having some meaning. Now, Howleys, which are like me, outsiders, people without spirit, without the living breath, white people, which I agree with, by the way. We tend to deal with it by scheming ways of diverting the lava flow. We want to keep our stuff. We like our homes. We don't believe in a goddess. We're afraid of lava, and we come up with things like, hey, can't we just bomb a trench and redirect the lava through our bombed trench? That's nature, right? That's a good idea. In either case, be it Hawaiian or Haole, the common denominator there is being overwhelmed. And so it's just the difference lies in how we deal with it, and that is predicted by how divorced from our nature we are, from our own environment we are. And so, outsiders, again, run screaming and scheme ways to divert through like bombs and stuff. And Hawaiians invite in, and there's acceptance. These are both learned, one healthier than the other, responses, one from a mind that understands itself to be interconnecting with nature, and the other that does not. But the overwhelming sense of a volcano going off is still that. Both people are still getting out of the way. No one's sitting in front of the lava flow going, love. You know what I mean? Being born is overwhelming. Being recontextualized in a DMT trip is overwhelming. Alien abductions are overwhelming. Initiation into secret schools is overwhelming. Hell, graduating from middle school to high school can be overwhelming. The I am experience is overwhelming and also wonderful and also full of awe. It's beautiful. It is beauty itself. And what I would say about that is the only part experiencing fear there is me. Right? I talked about my I am experience to this class of people from which this email of question has come. And so I'm assuming that you, listening to Our Undoing Radio, not having taken part in that class, is also familiar with my experiences to some degree. But essentially, if not, I had the experience of being and seeing nothingness, becoming self-aware, and that self-awareness exploding into the universe, and then seeing being all aspects of the universe. All of that seeing and beingness was happening at one time. And while it unfolds as if A to B to C, it's actually all happening right now. And it is you right now. And I've talked about that 8 million times. Go find it. But the part that I will talk about here is just that part of that I am experience is also being you. Like the thing that you just think you left is also still there, you. And me, I was like, oh my God, I'm dying. I'm having an aneurysm. Like, what's going on here? That was the only part that was experiencing the fear, was me. The me that was awoken into that experience. And similarly, right, I guess with DMT trips and psilocybin and that sort of stuff, they say go with the flow or else. If you fight it, and they tend to think that that means that it's a spiritual experience. It's not. It's a recontextualization of the self, for sure, as not in control and receded into the background, but it's not the death of self. In this I am experience, there was the complete death of self and then the resurrection within the experience. Nothingness is nothingness, but then once there's self-awareness, that self-awareness, that formless awareness, becomes all forms, and one of them is, oh, there I am again. I'm a form. And that form is fear. Because that's what thought is. Because thought, this thought construct, and especially because I'm not of a nature culture, I'm not even trying to clean the house. I'm trying to fight for my life here. Oh my God, I'm dying. What's going on? That's, again, that's me. That's what I am. I am that fear. Nothingness becoming self-awareness and exploding into everything is not fear. It is I who am afraid. I'm afraid I'm having an aneurysm. As if the birth of the universe is the end of me, right? How self-involved can you be? Well, pretty self-involved at the beginning and end, at the alpha and the omega. There's still me going, oh, but what about me? I'm dying. Spirit riding through the toy box of mind. That's how I've described one aspect of that sense of all-encompassing self-awareness, is that you are spirit. You are that formless awareness riding through the universe, riding through the toy box of its own imagination, like a smile in the wind, and that wind is going light speed. It's like you are a roller coaster ride, my friend. But even that roller coaster ride isn't frightening, isn't scary. The rocks aren't scared. I was those rocks in that moment. I saw through their eyes, jettisoning through space, eyes in quotes. Saw that perspective, saw through the perspective of space itself, saw through the perspective of trees and oceans, stars. None of that was afraid in that moment. Just me, just Jeremy. Because I live in a state of reaction to being alive in the first place. That's what we're circling back to here. And my long-buried trauma is the same trauma as yours and everyone else's. Being overwhelmed by being at all. That's not the creation myth. The creation myth is that there's a creation in the first place, and that this isn't always already happening right now. The things that we call creation myths or creation facts, everything is always already happening right now. The sense of movement, the sense of time, the sense of growing and evolving, that's the illusion. But like fear, it's a necessary illusion. Because that's what it means to be being. That's what it means to be this formless awareness, being. It is being all things, and we see how that expresses as time in the universe, the multiverse, whatever verse, a children's rhyme. There's a reason you gotta sing to babies. And it's not because they're in gosh golly darn awe of being alive. It's because, well, they anger real quick. Because they're confused. It's because they're not in control. They have to learn that. And then they have to see their way out of what they've learned to really be an adult. And that's the part very, very few of us want to do, because we just learned how to be in control. And that has its own perks. Unfortunately, it's also the death of our species, as we're seeing. But if I remember correctly, your class, that Tom Cheeseland class, a lot of people didn't want to hear that. I don't remember if you were one of them, but there it is. You're hearing it now. But not for long, because this episode is over.